Well, hello and welcome again to Principles of Macroeconomics. I am your host, Dr. B. Today we're going to be talking about production and growth, and we'll also discuss the concept of the financial system here in the United States. So, as we talk about production and growth, I want you to get into the mindset of the manufacturers around the country. We manufacture products here in the United States, and we either consume those products locally in the country, or we export the products to other countries. This is part of production. And growth, when we talk about growth, we're talking about the growth of the nation from both the perspective of population and, of course, gross domestic product. These are the things we're focused on when we talk about growth. So, these are very important concepts, and we'll talk much about these. I want to point out to where we are in the classroom. You have completed your midterm exam last week, which was week 8. So congratulations, all of you. You all passed the midterm exam. You passed it very well. Very proud of all of you. Most of you scored A's and B's. So this is very good news, yes? So thank you for a wonderful semester so far. Very proud of all of you. And let's not slow down, okay? The momentum, we keep going. We're in week 9 right now. So we're going to do the chapter 12, which is on the production and growth. For that chapter, you'll have a quiz. Very normal, 2 attempts, a couple, 5 questions or so, true, false, multiple choice, So very straightforward, of course, as it will be from here on out, yes? So let's talk about this production and growth, and of course, we'll jump into it. So when we talk about production and growth, of course, we're talking about the living standards and the growth rates around the world. We look at it from a country perspective. This is macroeconomics, so we look at the whole country. We're looking at production. When we produce goods and services, we consume them either locally or we export them. Okay? And the growth, we're talking about the growth of the country from the perspective of the population and, of course, gross domestic product. So these are the things we need to think about. Here's an example from the United Kingdom. In an advanced economy, they had a gross domestic product of $39,040 per person. The child mortality rate 0.4%, which is pretty low. It means not many children die at a young age. 0.4%. The lower the better, of course. Yes, we don't want to see the children die, especially at the early age. They have access to modern sanitation facilities, meaning they have access to running water. Yeah. And their education attainment is 60% enrolled in higher education. The population in the United Kingdom, very high. A lot of people that go on to get the associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and some get the master's, and very few get the doctorate. Very similar in the United States. This is not true for all countries, as you know. There are countries that still they lack modern running water. They lack electricity. They lack running water. Yes, this is still true even today for some countries around the world. Of course, we're all working to get better, and some countries need help. And so the developed nations like United States, United Kingdom, most of Europe, they help the other nations. In Mexico is doing very well overall. They're getting better. They continue to improve. Many years ago, maybe 30 years ago, 50 years ago, Mexico was not so great off. Yeah? Mexico GDP back then was very low. about $5,000 per person per year. Child mortality rate was much higher. Yes, they used to not all have running water. Now, in most recent years, GDP is much higher, so Mexico is doing much better. Child mortality rate went down a lot, down to 1.3%, still high, but much better. Sanitation, 85% of the people in Mexico have access to running water. Still a few, yes, unfortunately still do not have access to running water. The education in Mexico, not so great, yes, 30%. 30% of the Mexican population go on to pursue an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, etc. Of course, they need to do better, yes. How do they do so? The government needs to help their people in terms of helping them to get a better education. But overall, I think Mexico is doing much better than they have in the past. Now, here's another example, the country of Mali. Mali is not been doing so well, yes? Unfortunately, the GDP per person is about $1,500 today. Child mortality rate very, very high, 11.5%. What this means is 11.5% of all children in the country of Mali do not make it out of childhood. Very sad, yes? Sanitation facilities, 25% of the country has access to running water. And about 7% of their population get education beyond the high school. So it's unfortunate, but the people of Mali are still trying very hard to become better through their means, yes? This is a side-by-side comparison of most of the developed countries around the world and still developing ones, and we can see the comparison. For developed countries, we see that their GDP is typically higher, their child mortality rate is typically much lower, and they have higher education rates. For countries that are developing, we see the opposite effect, yes? But we also still see improvement, which is very good. So we see big differences. Developed countries tend to do very well with their GDP. Developing countries a little bit lower, but they're improving over time. Which leads to a variation in growth. We see the statistics here are correlated, yes? They're correlated mostly. For example, we see Brazil. Brazil, in 1900, the GDP was $828 per person. In 2014, it was $15,590. The growth rate in Brazil is 2.61%. Per year, yes. So we can see that Brazil is, yes, somewhat still developing country, but is becoming more mature. Same with Japan. China, yes, of course the growth rates are high. But we see the correlations, and we see how strong these correlations are. Now, a point of note here for United States and United Kingdom. These are very, very stable countries that have, I don't want to say plateaued, but they are mature in the development stage. And what this means is the growth rates are typically a little lower than countries that are still developing. We see that poorer countries are not necessarily doomed in poverty forever because the government changes, the social, economic situations change, people get the jobs, etc. And we see that incomes go from low to high over time. Some countries make it out of poverty and become much better off, like Singapore, for example. There's a lot of countries that are doing much better. The larger countries, the more rich wealthier countries are a little bit more stable. Some of them used to be fast growing. Now they're kind of steady. So there's old questions. Why are some countries richer than others? Well, a lot of it has to do with the political situations of the countries and their willingness to change. Other reasons might include the ability to advance. Yeah, sometimes we have barriers to success, right? For example, sometimes you might live in a country that you have limitations. Yes, lack of work. Yeah, a lack of a good education system. A lack of support. Yes, that's why some countries don't do as well as others. There's a lot of differences between them. Much of them, of course, is political, and other are social. Some seem to be stuck, and some seem to grow. There's a lot of factors that affect a country's growth rate. A lot of factors that affect the country's ability to be successful. And these factors include the ability to produce goods and services. This is what productivity means. Yes, the definition of productivity. A quantity of goods and services produced from each unit of labor input. Okay? A unit of labor can be defined as an hour worked, or it could be defined as a week that the employee works, or a year that the employee works, the amount of time. Yes, this is the labor, the work. The more people work, the higher the production rate. Very straightforward. That's what it means to be productive. They say, they'll say, oh, Dr. B, you need to be a productive member of society. Oh, what the hell does that mean? I always wonder this. What does it mean, be a productive member of society? It means to work, to be able to produce goods and services. Yeah, that's what it means to be productive. So the formula, very straightforward. Y over L. I know, sounds straightforward, right? Okay, Y over L. The Y is the real GDP. This is the quantity of the output produced. Quantity, Y. Quantity, Y. L is the quantity of labor. L is the quantity of labor. So think quantity of units produced, goods and services, divided by the number of hours worked. We'll break this down further. Why we use productivity to determine living standards. Higher productivity typically yields higher GDP. Higher productivity equals higher gross domestic product. This is typically true. Sometimes not, but most of the time, yes. Growth and productivity is the key. Yep. When productivity increases, so do the living standards. That's why we see now in 2022, we see this evolving a little bit. We have very high productivity. here in the United States. Very high productivity. Unemployment rate is very, very low. A lot of people working. And because a lot of people working, the living standards increase. Now you work more, so now you want nicer stuff. Okay, you work more, you want nicer stuff. I used to like the Coach bag knockoff, but now I want the Louis Vuitton. Okay, because I'm working more. You know what I mean. Oh, Chiquita, do you have another example of this? You work more, so you want what? Tell me. What did you used to like when you weren't working so much? But now that you're working more, what would you like?
Yeah, I overspend, Professor, on materialistic things, but I'm working on that part. But I'm also a good saver as well.
That's a good thing, yes. And we're going to talk about savings a little bit more in the next chapter. But yes, that's a good thing. Uh, your taste change, yes. Uh,
I agree.
yeah,
It gets more expensive.
you get more expensive, yeah. Oh, you went from the Carnival Cruise Line, now you want the Norwegian. Okay, you used to go to the McDonald's, now you're going out to steakhouse. Yeah, the change in the taste. You get more money, you spend more money on nicer things. This is a fact of living standards increasing when we have more productivity. Very true. Very true. Uh, so we say that the economy's income made by the workers is the economy's output. We spend the money we earn. Oh my goodness. Okay. So what determines productivity? What determines productivity? We said the definition, the formula for productivity is the number of the unit of output, okay, the quantity of output divided by the labor. The number of output divided by the labor. This is the formula for productivity. Okay, what goes into productivity? Well, the companies need to use property, plant, and equipment to develop, create the goods and the services. We need a factory. We need machinery. We need materials to create the products. We call this physical capital. Property, plant, and equipment. Property, plant, and equipment, we call this physical capital. Okay? In accounting, we call these fixed assets. Property, plant, and equipment. In economics, we call this physical capital. Same thing. Okay? Productivity is higher when the average worker has more property, plant, and equipment to help them to create the product. I know, I'm more productive when a machine helps me. Yeah, I can create more. The machine's helping me. This will cause an increase in the physical capital per worker when we have an increase in the amount of capital to help the worker. The amount of physical capital, property, plant, and equipment help the worker, therefore we make more units. Now, we talked about the property, plant, and equipment, which is the physical capital, buildings, yeah. Now, of course, we have the human side of things, the worker themselves. The workers need to be educated, trained, and gain the experience. Okay? With the knowledge and skills and abilities, the worker can get the better education, training, and the experience, of course. Productivity will, of course, increase when the employees' human capital have the additional education, skills, etc. Higher worker human capital, the higher the productivity. I can make more units when I am educated and trained on how to do it better. That's what this tells us. And of course, there is the natural resources that impact productivity. The factory, the physical capital, the property, plant, and equipment require some natural resources in order to be able to run. Okay? The building needs water. The building needs electricity. The building needs land to be on. Okay? These are all natural resources being used by the factory. Okay? The worker also needs natural resources to live: water, food, mineral deposits, etc. Mineral deposits are required to make the products, right? I need minerals to make the products. Sure. How do you think a battery is made? Lithium. Well, lithium is a natural resource. It is a mineral that we mine out of the ground to go into to make batteries. Yeah. This is why electric cars in 2022 having trouble trying to get the cost down. The mining part to get the lithium, very difficult. Yeah, and expensive. There are other examples of this, but we know that we need minerals to create products. So natural resources is an input to create the products. And of course, with more resources being used, we can create more products. And another factor that helps the productivity, of course, is technology. Technology, for example, would start with the invention of electricity and ultimately the invention of the assembly line. The assembly line was first invented by Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, which now is Ford Motors, as we know it today. They first created the assembly line. This is the inventors of the assembly line. Henry Ford said, we need a way in order to increase productivity. How do we do this? He created what we call now the assembly line. There are multiple stages where the raw materials goes into work in process. When it's in work in process, it goes to multiple stages, multiple departments. The car is being assembled as it rolls down the assembly line, you see? And then it becomes a finished good, and then it's available for sale when it's done. Yeah? So that is the assembly process, and it's done on what we call now the assembly line. This is a technological advancement back in the early 1900s. And then, of course, computers came about, which made it work much easier. The cell phone, of course, the smartphone. And now, in 2022, we're seeing more technological advancements with the use of robotic process automation, where robots are helping the humans through computer technology to work faster, right? We call this artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is really software, yeah, that we use in order to help us to become more advanced. For example, let's say you're typing an email to your friend, okay? You start writing the email. Create a new email, and you start typing. And before you type the whole word, you see the words appear before you. Like the computer knows what you're thinking about typing. Yeah? I'm sure you've all seen this by now, hopefully. And this is a part of artificial intelligence. Okay, the computer knows you through a process called machine learning. The computer predicts what you're going to type next based off of your previous typing. Okay? You wrote previous emails. The computer knows that you wrote those emails, understands your train of thought, and then proposes what you're going to type next. We use machine learning to create the artificial intelligence. Okay, so we see this is where we're heading. Yeah, so much advancement in technology. It boosts, of course, our productivity through these things. So the technology helps us to produce the goods and services. The humans, of course, expand based with this technology and then can better execute on the goods and services production. Nice quote. We'll skip that. The production, oh my goodness, the production function. I was wondering when we were going to get to this part of the course. The production function. Production function shows us graphically, using an equation, the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. The production function shows us graphically, using an equation, the relationship between the inputs, labor, physical capital, natural resources. These are the inputs. And the outputs, the products, the finished goods, the finished service, etc. The production function shows us this relationship between the two. So the formula, it's a little complex, okay? Don't freak out. I promise I'll walk you through it. Y, which is what we're trying to answer, this is the output. Output equals all these inputs. F, which is the function. A is the technology. Technology times the function of labor, physical capital, natural resources, and human capital. Labor, L. The K stands for physical capital, property, plant, and equipment. H stands for human capital. That's physical labor, yeah? And N stands for the natural resources. So again, technology times the function, which is labor, physical capital, human capital, and natural resources. This is the production function. So it sounds funny to say. Now, the production function has a property consistent returns to scale. What this means, we can increase our production by a percentage or an input to cause an output. What I mean by this is that we can figure out the amount we need to input in order to cause an increase in our output. For example, we can double all of our inputs to double our output by simply multiplying by 2, yes? We can increase all of our inputs, which will cause an increase in our output by a percentage. We just take the percentage and multiply, yeah? And with this, we can see this, that it's a cause and effect, yeah? If we multiply each unit by a factor of 1, then the output is multiplied also by a factor of 1. The equation shows that the productivity depends on the level of technology, A, the physical capital, K, the human capital, L, and the natural resources, N. All of these are a factor of labor per worker. Yeah. Let's see here. This particular learning activity is okay. It's okay. It shows us, we're not going to go through this whole thing. Yeah? It shows us the correlation between countries over the long run. Yeah? What happens when we change the taxes? What happens when there's cash payments for goods and to attend a good school? Tuition. What happens when there's a crackdown on government corruption? A restriction on imports to protect the domestic industries? The allowance of free trade? Giving away, yeah. So there's a lot of things that governments do in order to either restrict or encourage growth and living standards. Yep. So policy is one of the biggest factors when it comes to productivity and living standards. Public policy can drive this growth through, and Chiquita said it earlier, savings and investment. Yeah. Diminishing returns, the catch-up effect. Investment from other countries. Investment into education, health and nutrition, property rights, political stability, free trade, research and development, production growth. All of these things can lead to increased productivity and increased living standards. But these must be initiated through the government of each country. Savings and investment, very good thing to protect the future of productivity, yes? I can invest in the current resources of capital, both physical and human, which will, of course, ensure future productivity. If I improve my property, plant, and equipment, and I improve the payment of my wages to my employees, of course, I can enhance the future of production. Of course, it's difficult to spend if there's not enough to go around. Yeah, so that's one of the trade-offs. Sometimes the resources are scarce. We talked about that very early on in this course. Resources are typically always scarce, and therefore producing more capital requires producing fewer consumption goods. Yeah, it's a trade-off. Reducing consumption will increase the savings. Of course, if I don't spend as much, I'll save more. But the law of diminishing returns. Diminishing returns tells us that there are fewer resources used to make the consumption of goods, of course. When we have more resources, we can make more capital goods. An increase in the capital will, of course, increase productivity and the living standards. If I pay my employees more, they will spend more. If I invest in the property, plant, and equipment, physical capital, I will improve the business and be able to produce more. However, it's important to understand that fast growth is a temporary thing because of the law of diminishing returns. As the capital increases, the extra output from the additional units of capital will decrease. What I mean by this is I can only put so much in. I can only put so much human capital, only so much physical capital into the business. I'll reach a point where that no longer makes a difference. You can put all the money you want into capital, but you'll reach a point where it no longer makes a difference. You'll no longer see increased production. It will become stable and then fall off. Law of diminishing returns. For example, I can push my employees as hard as I can. They will reach what we call the optimal output. Optimal output. Okay, that means they'll produce as many units as possible until, of course, if I push them too hard, the law of diminishing returns affects us and they'll produce less. If employees have little capital, meaning I'm not paying them very much, giving them more will, of course, will increase their productivity. Yeah? And that happens a lot at first. But then, as we see, if they already have enough capital, then the law of diminishing returns starts to take effect. Keep going up until we reach the point where it no longer makes a difference. We can see that this is also true in developing nations. Countries that don't have as much wealth, they start, of course, at the beginning. As the country increases in wealth, we can pay the employees more. As they get paid more, they produce more. And we also see with rich countries, you pay them a little bit more, it don't make a whole lot of difference in the output. Yeah. The catch-up effect. There was a time in history, 1960 to 1990, where the United States and South Korea, they shared similar gross domestic product and investments. The United States invested in South Korea. South Korea invested a little bit in the United States. The two countries grew very quickly. Yeah? South Korea grew faster than the United States during this time period because the level of investment into South Korea was higher. The South Korean government and the U.S. government invested in South Korea to grow their economy during this time frame. This, of course, happened after the Korean War, yes? Some countries invest in other countries in order to have some type of stake, right? United States, for example, purchases land in other countries, sometimes for use or sometimes for a direct investment. They hold on to it in the hopes that the land grows in value. We see China does this a lot. They will purchase pieces of land, they'll start purchasing businesses in other countries, etc. In order to, of course, gain on their side, but also to have an investment in other countries. There's benefits on both sides, typically. So, for example, when the United States invests into another country in order to help them out on a project or to purchase parcels of land, this benefits that country because they're receiving the revenue. Yep. And it helps the United States because they're receiving more of a power thing. Yeah. And so it's a good thing overall. But we see that When there is foreign investment, there's also increases in the economy's stock of capital, higher productivity, higher wages, etc. And of course, the exchange of goods and services and technologies. When people invest in education, we see a correlation with wages. More educated workers typically earn more than uneducated workers. This is true. The reason for this is because when you gain an education, you're gaining skills. You use those skills in the workforce. Your new skills that you earn from Dr. B and his accounting and in his economics class will help you to earn higher wages in the future. You're investing in yourself when you invest in higher education. Yes. Of course, when you go to school, there is what we call opportunity cost. You know that opportunity cost definition means that it is the cost of what you gave up. In order for you to attend Dr. B's classes, you gave up working. Instead of being at work right now, you're with me right now. Okay? So the opportunity cost is the hourly wages that you would have made working instead of hanging out with me. But I'm glad you're hanging out with me. Of course, health and nutrition, very important. With higher health and nutrition in a country, they'll be more productive. That's the correlation. Very straightforward. In poorer countries, sometimes they remain poor because their people are not healthy. Yep. Yes, it's a vicious cycle, unfortunately. And a lot of this has to do with the political positions and policies of certain countries. Rights and political stability are very important, as you know. Here in the United States, we are very fortunate. Our people have wonderful rights. Our people are very stable, and we experience strong economic growth in the United States because our people have rights and our government is stable. Okay? I know, yes, the news. Don't listen to the news. Okay? Everything is okay here. It's much better here than it is in a lot of other places around the world. I can tell you this firsthand. Even in Europe. In Europe, most of Europe, the freedom of speech, that's an American thing. Okay? If you speak out against certain things in Europe, you'll be thrown in jail. Okay? Those same rights are not across the world. You have freedom of speech in the United States, but when you go to another country, you might not. Okay? So be careful when you travel. Yeah? You might get in trouble. Just because you are a citizen of this country, you go to another country, those rights do not apply because you're there, not here. You see? So it's important to understand this. Property rights. This is big. Here in the United States, the landowners have rights. Okay? If you own your house, you have rights. Okay? To the property. The government cannot just come in and take it. Okay? It doesn't work that way in the United States. Okay? In the United States, the property owners have rights. Okay? You own the land, you own the house, you own whatever, your car, whatever. You own it. Okay? That's yours. The government cannot just come in and take it. Okay? You have rights. That's in the United States. In other countries, this is not true. For example, in Venezuela, definitely not true. The government can come and take whatever they like. Okay? In Cuba, definitely not true. The government owns everything. In China, definitely not true. The Chinese government can come take your house, no problem. Okay? So Think about this for a second and understand that in the United States, we in the United States have the most rights out of any country on the planet. Okay? And politically stable here, yes. We don't have instability. Some governments are very corrupt. This is true. For example, one time I was driving in Italy. Okay, I was visiting family, driving in Italy. I got pulled over by the police. Okay, well, don't know if I was speeding. I might have been. Sometimes my foot gets a little heavy. Anyway, I get pulled over, and the police officer approaches my car, and I rolled down the window. What's the problem? Ba ba ba. Oh, you were speeding. Ba ba ba. Well, you can pay me cash now, or you go to jail. Yes. Okay. So this is not right. I know this. Yeah. He wanted a bribe. The Italian government. There's a little corruption. Not too bad. Not too bad. I've seen worse. There's other worse places, but you see, there's no such thing as a perfect government. All of them are corrupt in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. Some are just more honest than others. But yeah, this is true. Free trade. Free trade, of course, we know makes everyone better off. It should, and it does, because there's no tariffs, there's no limitations on imports and exports, etc. These are good things. And of course, some we favor more than others. For free trade, we have the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA. We have a few other trade agreements with other countries, which have benefited the United States over time. So, free trade benefits all. Some have inward policies and outward policies. It depends, right? Some will favor exporting more than importing. Yeah. Research and development is so important in any company, and especially in companies that manufacture medicine. Research and development. This is how we cure disease. This is how we as a people improve. Research and development is how these things are possible. Research and development are done at universities like UDC that receive grants for research. A lot of the research that we do benefits the public good. Yeah, we create new products at the university that are designed to improve the public good. Robotics, engineering. A lot of these things help the public good, and they're developed at UDC through grants. Yep, very common. The government helps to promote research and development by offering tax incentives and direct support through grants and loans, etc. As the population continues to increase, we'll have more workers. Yeah. And with more workers, we can produce more goods. But of course, the other side of that is there's more consumption, more mouths to feed. Yeah. We already have problems with water. Drinking water is becoming more scarce over time because we have more people living on the planet. So we have less water to drink. Yes, this is a problem, of course, and we're working with technology to fix this problem. There is what we call salination plants. Basically, we're turning the ocean water into drinking water, through a process we call salination. Anyway, it takes the salt out of the water, and it distills the water to become drinkable. It's a long process, very expensive. Maybe someday we'll get there. Exactly. Miss Rhodes. I'm sorry, Miss Anthony. Yeah, we see that this is developing. Yeah, because scientifically we're trying to improve, and one way we could do this is by turning the ocean water into drinking water because we're running out of drinking water. There's so many other advancements that we're making with science and technology, but it's we're working on it. It's very expensive. As the population continues to grow, what happens is that the spread of capital investment will slow down. And the reason for this is because with so many people doing all the work, the wages will not change much. Yeah? Some countries are trying to limit the number of the population. For example, China used to have, I think they still do. They might not now, but they have what's called a one-child policy. So only one child can be born to each couple. Yeah, in China, that's to limit the growth in the country. So yeah, it's it's interesting what some countries do in comparison to others. The world growth, of course, we continue to see more growth, more people. But with more people, of course, there will be more scientists, more doctors, more engineers, etc. We see this with human history. We're going to skip that part. Some argue population growth is good. Some people argue that it's bad. I don't know. Technology, as it increases, of course, as you know, you've seen this in the news a lot recently. In 2022, the government, U.S. government, is trying to get away from using oil, yeah, and relying more on electric cars and hybrid cars, etc., to consume less fuel. Is it good? Yeah, sure. Yes, of course it's good. It's good for the environment. It might be good for humans. We're not too sure yet. The reason I say this is it's very expensive. Right now in 2022, you want to buy an electric car, it'll cost you a minimum of $60,000. $60,000. That's more than what a lot of people make in a year. Okay? So very expensive, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the lithium, mining. You're trading one evil for another, really, with this whole gas-electric debate. You want less gas, but you're gonna need to mine more lithium to get the batteries. Okay, so pick your poison. Yeah, less gas, more lithium. More gas, less lithium. I don't know. And the other thing that drives me crazy is with this, and I'll get off this topic, but the thing that drives me crazy is they want us all to have electric cars, but yet the electric grid in the United States runs on gasoline. So think about that for a second. You want us to drive more electric cars, but yet the electric grid in the United States runs on oil, mostly, and coal, mostly. So think of that, yeah? You see what I'm saying? It's difficult. It's a difficult problem to solve. Okay. So in the long run, living standards are determined by productivity. They're correlated very strongly. It's important that you know that production function formula. That's very important, especially for the homework. Yes. Determinants of the productivity will affect the next generation's standard of living. The more successful we are now, the better off our future is. Yes, absolutely. Savings and investment will also determine future investment. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, let me stop this part of the recording, and we'll jump into the financial system. Stand by.